He has over 25 years of experience. He also helps manufacturers, distributors, companies do about, I think, $20 million plus. I'm just like putting a number out there that I've learned, help with people, processes, technologies, data, drive massive digital growth. And he's also a host of an incredible podcast called the eCommerce Edge. And he's also recognized as a dark matter top 25 e-commerce voice. So Jason, I'm so excited to have you on our podcast today. So going from, traditional sales all the way to the digital kind of first selling aspect, how was that mind shift for you? How did you kind of tackle that going into, from traditional to digital? How was that?
It was easier for me personally.
What have you done over the years to be relevant, to make sure that, you're changing with the times? Because obviously you've been in the forefront of it. So adapting to the changes would obviously be easy and hard both. So what are these foundational gaps you saw, like when kind of going through these opportunities over the years? And how has that kind of, cleared up your mindset, I guess, now in the AI generation of e-commerce?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because
being a consultant, I guess, how do you, even there are a lot of B2B companies that are very traditional in the way they think. They don't really understand the impact that AI is going to have until it's too late. So I know I've worked with some companies like that, but when you are, consulting these companies or distributors or manufacturers, how do you help them to rethink their internal operation model? Like, hey, it's going to go AI, it's going to go, digital self-serve. How are you going to, change your core, buying channels? What are you going to do? So how do you address that?
Well, first, I have a rule inside my practice, which is I don't try to sell the unsellable.
But according to you, what do you think is hesitant? What creates that, in companies that, sometimes that you cannot work with? What do you think business leaders are actually thinking when they hesitate to adapt that, new world e-commerce? What is actually going through their mind? I mean, because there's so many studies out there. There's so many results-oriented information out there now that this is what the, buyers are doing. There is buyer knowledge, free information reports that are out there. They don't even need to pay for those research. So what are these leaders actually thinking, if you don't mind putting some light on that?
It's mostly an age thing. If I'm brutally honest, it's mostly an age thing.
Hi, welcome everyone to the VSERVE e-business solution podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the industry's great experts to share their experience and gather some helpful tips along the way. I'm Cynthia, your host for today. And today I am truly excited to start a conversation with one of the most essential, I guess, person from the B2B space. Our guest, he's recognized in the authority who has been at the forefront of the e-commerce revolution for over 2 decades. From what I've learned, he has over 25 years of experience. He also helps manufacturers, distributors, companies do about, I think, $20 million plus. I'm just putting a number out there that I've learned, help with people, processes, technologies, data, drive massive digital growth. And he's also a host of an incredible podcast called the eCommerce Edge. And he has over 600 episodes, so maybe I learned something from him today. And he's also recognized as a dark matter top 25 e-commerce voice. So Jason, I'm so excited to have you on our podcast today. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Same here. I'm so excited to learn from you. I'm new in the whole podcast world, but I hope, you can kind of contribute to our little starting point here for VSERVE. I would love, my podcast is all about learning about you, about your career and how you kind of got here and what you've learned along the way. So I'll start all the way from the top. How did you end up in e-commerce? How has this 25 years of journey kind of inspired you? I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I think like many people that work in e-commerce, I never set out to be in e-commerce. I never set out, in the beginning to have a career in e-com. My first career was actually in hospitality, running and managing restaurants and bars. And then I through a mutual friend, I met somebody who was running a digital agency. I was living in Christchurch, New Zealand at the time. I'm originally from Southern California. I moved to New Zealand in my early 20s. I was living in Christchurch in the South Island, and through a mutual friend, I met someone who was running an e-commerce and digital agency, and I knew, just because of my usage of the internet, and I remember using net to phone, early versions of VoIP to call back to friends in the United States very cheaply over the internet. And, we were really starting to use the internet pretty heavily at that point, but e-commerce was not that big of a thing yet. It hadn't become the normal way to transact online. And it hadn't got the mainstream yet. It hadn't hit the mainstream yet. And so it was very early days in this world of e-com. But even then, I could see that the world was going to embrace this eventually. I knew that there were trust issues. I knew that there were people were worried about having their credit card data stolen. They were, they didn't know how to do due diligence on online businesses to see if they were legit or if they were run from some overseas, dodgy operation overseas where they were going to get ripped off. And so I think, in those early days, I could see where the general market and general industry was headed, but I didn't know how fast it was going to get there. And I knew that I wanted to be part of that. And I started talking to this guy who ran this agency. And funnily enough, he was also an American. He had married a Kiwi, and he was running this agency down in Christchurch. And they were building websites, e-commerce websites, most of them bespoke, a lot of them built in Flash. This was just in these early days. I think most people today don't understand how difficult it was to build a transactional e-commerce website that long ago. It was hard. Yeah. Everything was hard. Everything from payment gateways to e-commerce platforms to custom development to system integration, just everything was very difficult. And there weren't, there was no Shopify back in those early days. There was no simple platform. The first major platform that I built my own e-commerce business on was a platform called OS Commerce, which is short for open source commerce. And so just everything was difficult. And I went to work in business development and digital marketing for this agency. And then about 6 months after I started there, I started up a side hustle e-commerce business with a friend of mine where we were actually importing memory cards into New Zealand. We were warehousing them locally and we were shipping them out. And so we were kind of a hybrid D2C, B2C brand. And that business grew very fast. We, within 6 months of us starting that business, one of us needed to be in the business full time. So I left my role and I focused on this business. We were running it from our bedrooms. Myself and my business partner were running it from our bedrooms. And then over the following 6 months, it grew. It doubled again in size. And so my business partner quit his full-time job and we were running the business together full-time for about 7 years. And then we sold that business off. I went back into agency land. I ran a digital agency for a while. And then I went back and I worked for the largest online retailer of natural health products in New Zealand called HealthPost. After I was with them for several years, and I helped them replatform every single piece of digital technology in the business, ERP, implemented a CRM for the very first time, implemented a PIM system for the very first time, upgraded the WMS system, upgraded from Magento to BigCommerce Enterprise, and we basically re-architected the whole commerce ecosystem within the business in the years that I was there. And then I after I left there, I went back into the e-commerce agency landscape. And then once I was done with that, I actually bought into a friend's agency. And so we ran that for a few years. And then I started my own independent consultancy. So here I am. And it's been a long journey. It's been a fun journey. It's been an amazing journey. And now I focus 100% on B2B e-commerce now. So I don't focus on retail, B2C, D2C e-commerce anymore. For the first half of my career, I was really heavily focused on B2C and D2C. Latter half of my career is very heavily focused on B2B, wholesale distribution e-commerce. And that's what I specialize in now. I work with manufacturers. I work with distributors. I work with SIs and agencies. I work with platform vendors and I work with investors, but all in the B2B e-commerce space. So it's been a really fun journey. It's been a long journey, but I was lucky enough I'm old enough that I remember when we had no internet. I remember the coming of internet and dial-up. And then I remember the coming of mainstream internet where everybody had access to internet. And then they eventually had access to high-speed internet. And so I'm of that sort of middle generation where I still remember a world without the internet. I still remember a
Yeah.
world where I still remember a world without these little smartphone devices.
Yeah.
I still remember a world where kids went outside to play and ride bicycles and play basketball, and they weren't glued to a device or a screen. So I've had a really interesting pole position to see every major transformation of our industry over the last 25 years, and it's been a really fun ride.
Wow, I would say this was one of the best introductions that I've heard or gotten from anyone, because it just puts into perspective of the knowledge that you've gained over the years, and it's through experiences, right? So just going into it, and every single person that I talk to in terms of e-commerce or supply chain, anything in this area, they just happen to come across it. It wasn't like, this was my dream, this is what I want to do. No, it's just like, I was doing this, I got thrown into this, and now this has become my passion. So I love that. I love learning. I'm also millennial, so I understand. I got a little bit of that generation where we used to go and play outside. So I understand, the process of coming into e-commerce. And I was also from a food industry coming into e-commerce was one of the best decisions, I feel like, because there's so much to learn here, right? So, when you were telling me your journey, I was so excited to hear, okay, what about this? How did this change? How did this change? So going from, traditional sales all the way to the digital kind of first selling aspect, how was that mind shift for you? How did you kind of tackle that going into, from traditional to digital? How was that?
It was easier for me personally because my dad, when I was very young, so I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, and my father owned, before computers went mainstream, he owned a typewriter sales and service company. And then when computers started to go mainstream in the business world, he
Hmm.
opened up a computer store selling business computers, selling Eagle business computers, and then eventually getting into selling PC clones specifically for business users. And so I grew up around this. My dad did a little bit of programming. He did a little bit of system admin. He got into Linux really early on. So my dad was always really into technology. And so I was never afraid of technology. I was playing around with computers from the TRS-80 days and even
Yeah.
before that. And so I was always exposed to technology very early on in my life, even from the time I was a very young kid. And so technology really never scared me. And so I was always early. I wouldn't say I was bleeding edge with all the technology that I used, but I would definitely be considered an early adopter of technology.
Hmm.
And that's the way I've been my whole life. And so for me, it felt very natural to want to learn more about our industry, to get more deeply embedded in it, and always to try to find ways to do things better. And I remember the very early days of the first e-commerce website myself and my partner developed for our business. And eventually we re-platformed to OS Commerce, and then we moved on from there. But originally, the e-commerce platform that we were working with, which was provided by the agency that I worked inside of as my first career in the industry, or my
Hmm.
first job in the industry, they had partnered with a vendor based in Australia of what we would now call a SaaS e-commerce platform. So it was all
Yeah.
100% web-based. They didn't call it SaaS. They just called it an e-commerce platform that you access via the browser. And
Yeah.
I remember back then when people would put in their credit card data to make a purchase, those were stored in the website's database, but there was no integration with payment gateways. And so what we had to do is we had to log into the back end. We had to manually
Mhm.
write down the credit card numbers and the transaction amount on this bank form where we had our merchant account. Then we had to ring a phone number. We had to give the amount. We had to give the credit card number over the phone, keying it in via the keypad, and we had to give the expiry date. We had to get an authorization code that would write down on the form, and there was like
Yeah.
50 lines on the form. And then what we would do is when we got all 50 lines populated with approval numbers, we'd take that entire form, we'd go down to the bank, we would put that in over the counter, we'd submit that over the counter for processing, and then the money would be pulled out of the customer's credit card account. And so the pre-auth was the phone call, and then the
Ah,
actual debiting happened once we submitted this form to the bank. So it would take us between 7 and 14 days to get
yeah.
paid for all of the transactions that we had been paid for through the internet. And so just I think most people today that maybe are thinking of starting an online business, and maybe they go with Shopify at $29 a month or whatever it is, and they
Yeah.
have They have shop pay built in. They can upload some products. They can they can subscribe to a domain name. They can enter in their domain name. They can even have Shopify host everything for them. And setting up email through Gmail is super easy now, even if you've got your own domain. So the ease with which people can get started in e-commerce today we're at the best place ever in the history of commerce to get started with e-commerce. But the flip side of that coin is, because it's easy and because the barrier to entry is so low, it's even harder to be successful with e-commerce today than perhaps it was 25 years ago. And so
25 years ago.
I think, anytime you democratize access to a technology or to a platform or to a sales channel, then it means that people flood into that channel, and it all of a sudden becomes more about how can I do marketing, how can I do product innovation, how can I acquire customers, how can I keep them happy, how can I keep them coming back for more. So I think it's easier than ever before to start doing e-commerce today, but it's just as hard, if not harder today, to be successful in e-commerce than it ever was.
Yeah, because there's so many of us out there, right?
Yes.
There's so many agencies, there's so many companies offering so many different things, but they're all doing the same thing. So how do you make yourself known? And I guess that kind of brings me to my next question is, what have you done over the years to be relevant, to make sure that, you're changing with the times? Because obviously you've been in the forefront of it. So adapting to the changes would obviously be easy and hard both. So what are these foundational gaps you saw, like when kind of going through these opportunities over the years, and how has that kind of, cleared up your mindset, I guess, now in the AI generation of e-commerce?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because I think one of the keys for me is that I have always been really good at pattern recognition, right? I've always been really good at detecting what's happening just by observing sort of pop culture, observing what's happening in my core age group, people younger than me, people older than me. I've always been very observant, and I've seen so many patterns emerge in our industry over the years that when something new comes along, it's like, okay, that's not exactly like what's happened before, but it has enough in common with patterns that I've seen emerge before that I go, okay, this is, maybe a minor change in our industry, or versus this is going to completely dramatically bring upheaval to our industry in new ways. And so I think the biggest shift that I first really saw, apart from the coming of the internet to begin with, was when mobile became mainstream. When the iPhone 3G and 3GS came out, I immediately noticed, and even before that, I remember a friend of mine, he was a big Nokia fan, and he had one of the very first Nokias with a WAP browser, and that was a proprietary browser protocol for mobile devices, and it was designed to run on old crappy LCD screens, black and white LCD screens. And I remember when he showed me this phone, and he paid thousands for this phone. I think it was 3910. I can't remember what the number was, but it was cutting edge at the time. It was thousands of dollars. It was a very small phone, and he showed it to me, and he always had the most cutting edge cell phones available at the time. And I remember him showing me WAP browser and being able to browse the internet with the phone being connected to the internet. Now that was like dial-up speeds, but I immediately thought when he got online and he was navigating websites, although it was black and white LCD and it was sort of scrolling down the page, I thought right then and there, this is going to change everything forever, because this is as bad as the mobile browsing experience is ever going to get. It's only going to get better from here, right? And then when we saw the iPhone come out, it was game changing. And when it was a full touchscreen and a full scale browser, and it could interpret HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all in the mobile browser. And then obviously, as I saw advancements continue to come to that, and then Android went mainstream, Windows Phone went mainstream for a little while and then died a quick death. I even remember the early generations of BlackBerry. I had a BlackBerry Pearl. I had multiple BlackBerries in the early days for business specifically. And so I could see these patterns start to emerge. And certainly AI is the latest, what I would call totally game-changing technology that is going to forever change how we do things online, how we interact with other humans. It's forever going to alter that. And it's kind of like, you couldn't put the mobile genie back in the bottle back in the day after the iPhone was first released. We're not going to be able to put the AI genie back in the bottle. So,
Yeah.
do I think that AI is going to make the world a panacea? Absolutely not. Is it going to be the end of humanity? Well, certainly not tomorrow. Long term remains, but certainly, I think that AI, and particularly its impact on commerce, is only just starting to be felt now. And I've been really heavily into AI since the very early days. I always try to be an early adopter and user of technology. And I remember over a year ago, I started rerouting all of my web queries. I went cold turkey. I had used Google for, 20 plus years. And I
Yeah.
went cold turkey and rerouted all of my Omnibox queries directly to ChatGPT with a plugin, a
Yeah.
ChatGPT plugin for my browser. And I just decided, look, if I really want to learn this stuff, then I have to go all in on this. Just like I've gone all in on technology all throughout my life, I have to really double down on this. So I started, developing apps in Lovable, and I started doing queries. I would start comparing responses and results depending on my prompts between ChatGPT and Grok and Gemini and all sorts of other, large language model platforms or answer engine platforms. And I really, I think that is the thing that has made me successful and adaptable throughout my career. Is I've never ever lost the sense of curiosity about
Mhm.
technology. I've never ever lost that. I've remained curious for the entirety of my career, and I'm just a naturally curious person anyway. I annoyed my parents all the time I was growing up with constantly asking them why, constantly asking them a million questions, and
Yeah.
that level of curiosity about the world around me has translated well into a career that requires constant adaptation to survive. Like,
Yeah.
I saw the writing on the wall when I first started my independent e-commerce consultancy just over 5 years ago. The B2C and D2C e-commerce world is extremely mature, and
Yeah.
the design patterns used in B2C and D2C e-commerce are very mature. So most brands, when they first start out, they're going to probably use a Shopify on the front end. They're probably going to use QuickBooks on the back end, and they're probably going to use Klaviyo for marketing. And then they get a little bit bigger, and they might upgrade from QuickBooks to NetSuite, and then they might upgrade to a full-blown CDP, or they might, they'll upgrade components of the stack. Then they'll have maybe at some point they'll implement a PIM system, and then they'll, when they grow again, then they'll implement these other things. And I was starting as someone who's very technical, and as someone who's always leaned towards the more technical and operational aspects of e-commerce as an enterprise architect and someone who's done a lot of client consulting throughout my life. I saw that this whole world was going to become AI first, right?
Mhm.
It's not going to happen overnight, but I
Yeah.
also saw that B2C and D2C were sort of becoming very vanilla in the way that they did things, and I saw that the data shows that about 98% of retailers today offer e-commerce in some way. Whereas depending on category, vertical, and market, only about 40 to 60%
Mhm.
B2Bs, meaning manufacturers and distributors, offer e-commerce today. So they might do
Yeah.
EDI, they might do punch out, but not all of them have a self-service e-commerce portal. And so I was like, man, this feels like a much more blue ocean environment to consult in. And I had some, luckily I had agency experience serving some B2B manufacturers and distributors. So I had been exposed to some really complex B2B projects that I really enjoyed. And so I thought,
Mhm.
why would I become a generic e-commerce consultant, which is totally red ocean and totally competitive, when there's
Yeah.
not that many of us that specialize in B2B? There's not that many of us that have experience in B2B. Why wouldn't I
Yeah.
double down on that? Because the growth forecast for B2B when I first started was it was going to be 8 to 10x the growth of B2C and D2C e-commerce till at least
Yeah.
2030. And so I was like, I'm seeing similar patterns emerge to what I've seen before. And I said, wow, okay, B2B e-commerce is about 5 to 10 years behind today where B2C and D2C e-commerce is. So it felt like there was a massive opportunity there to do some great work without very much competition and to really make my mark in that
Yeah.
space and become known in that space. And so that's what I did, and it's worked out better than I could have ever imagined.
That's amazing. You kind of answered half my questions right there, in terms of integrations, in terms of, how complex B2B e-commerce is, versus B2C. And I think that most of the businesses are kind of seeing it now, while, we are calling it the digital self-serve, timing. They're kind of understanding that. But being a consultant, I guess, how do you, even there are a lot of B2B companies that are very traditional in the way they think. They don't really understand the impact that AI is going to have until like it's too late. So I know I've worked with some companies like that, but when you are, consulting these companies or distributors or manufacturers, how do you help them to rethink their internal operation model? Like, hey, it's going to go AI, it's going to go, digital self-serve. How are you going to change your core, buying channels? What are you going to do? So how do you address that?
Well, first, I have a rule inside my practice, which is I don't try to sell the unsellable. So
Mhm.
if a distributor or manufacturer is expecting me to come in and convince them that
Yeah.
digital commerce is or should be important to their business, they're not a good fit for me. And
Mhm.
second of all, I don't work with SMBs. I work with the manufacturers and distributors I work with. They're doing a minimum of $20 million a year in revenues, all the way up to about $1 billion is kind of my
Yeah.
sweet spot in
Yeah.
revenues. And they have to have already decided that e-commerce is important to them and
Yeah.
important to their customers, or digital commerce more broadly should be important to them and should be important to their customers. And oftentimes they're coming to me because either A, they have a competitor in the market that has leapfrogged them, technically speaking, and is offering an experience that is so far superior to theirs that they go, "Oh my God, they're eating our lunch," and we're now in fast catch up mode. Or they have customers that have come to them and said, "Look, we need you to service us digitally because procurement costs are going through the roof in our business, and we need you to service us digitally in some form of an automated way." Or one of two things will happen: either we're going to go and shop somewhere else, or you're going to
Mhm.
give us an additional discount to cover the additional procurement costs that costs us to do business with you. And so
Yeah.
oftentimes there's just this massive market pressure. And from we know from Forrester research from 2024 that at the end of 2024, over 70% of B2B buyers in the United States are now millennial and Gen Z. So the buying
Yeah.
demographic has changed. So their expectations of digital
Mhm.
self-service have changed. And even
Exactly.
if those buyers transact with you, like place the order with you via EDI or punch out, they still
Mhm.
have a total expectation of many other services being able to be self-serviceable through what I call a digital services layer, or a portalized experience. They expect to be able to log in and research products. They expect to be able to download spec sheets. They expect to be able to lodge digital quote requests. They expect to be able to lodge digital RMA requests. Expect to be able to log in and check the status of their credit account. They expect to be able to log in and check inventory, pricing, MOQs, buying increments. There's so many things that they expect to be able to self-serve other than the transaction digitally,
Yeah.
that a lot of these manufacturers and distributors, they don't understand that e-commerce doesn't just mean the transaction. It means digitally servicing your customers in all the ways they want to be serviced. And
Yeah.
the final thing I'll say about this is that it's very exciting. This merging of conversational AI and multimodal AI is
Mhm.
allowing former communication only channels in the B2B world to effectively be turned into headless commerce channels. So we think of
Yeah.
email, we think of WhatsApp, we think of Slack, we think of Teams, we think of all the ways in which B2B customers communicate with an account manager, for example, and maybe they attach a PDF of a PO to an email, send it to their account manager and say, "Hey, Bob, Jane, can you process this order for me?" Or they send
Yeah.
it to the customer service team and they say, "Can you process this order for me?" Or, "Can you get me a price on this? Can you get me an inventory check on this?" And they send it through WhatsApp or Slack. And now we can intercept that with multimodal AI. We can grab that communication and we can conversationally communicate back with the customer automatically, just as if they had logged into the portal to do those tasks. And so, just as if they had logged into the portal to upload that PO and place that order, we now
Mhm.
can map that PO directly into our commerce system as if the customer did it themselves. And that allows us to get a lot more value out of our commerce system and investments, because it doesn't require the customer to change their behavior to get value
Yeah.
out of those investments. And so
Yeah.
it's a very exciting time to to be in B2B e-commerce today.
Yeah. But according to you, what do you think is like hesitant? Like what creates that, in companies that, sometimes that you cannot work with? What do you think business leaders are actually thinking when they hesitate to adapt that, new world e-commerce? What is actually going through their mind? I mean, because there's so many studies out there, there's so many results oriented information out there now that this is what the, buyers are doing. There's buyer knowledge, free information reports that are out there. They don't even need to pay for those research. So what are these leaders actually thinking, if you don't
It,
mind putting some light on that?
it's mostly an age thing. If I'm brutally honest, it's
Yeah.
mostly an age thing, and it's probably in some respects mostly a gender thing, because in the B2B
Hmm.
on the supply side, so we now know that on the buy side is younger than ever, and it's more
Yeah.
diverse. It's more diverse than ever. It's not the good old boys club of two dudes communicating with each other and
Yeah.
negotiating a transaction. There's more women, there's more minorities, there's like the diversity on the buy side is wild,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
diversity on the sell side has not kept up with the diversity
Yeah.
on the buy side. And as a result of that, we have very old school sales reps, oftentimes
Yeah.
40, 50, 60, 70 years old, still working in the
Yeah.
industry. And they have a
Yeah.
lot of institutional and tribal knowledge that's in their
Yeah.
head, because they know the industry inside and out, and they think it's their secret sauce. They think what they know up here is their secret sauce, and they oftentimes are afraid of digital solutions stealing their commission, for example, or stealing
Yeah.
their customers. And so when I first go in and I talk to sales teams, I'm the devil, right? I'm the guy that's going to pick their pocket. I'm the guy that's going to replace them with the robots, right? But give me 10
Yeah.
minutes with any sales team and I'll walk out of there their best friend, because I'm a massive advocate for sales teams. I'm a massive advocate for belly to belly selling, which often happens in the B2B world. But what I'm not a fan of is having salespeople, very expensive, very well paid salespeople, doing
Yeah.
admin functions. That's not what and I don't know a salesperson alive that likes the average in the industry is somewhere between 20 and 60% of a
Yeah.
salesperson's time is spent on pure admin functions, going out,
Yeah.
taking an order on site, coming back to the office, keying it into an ERP system, updating a CRM, doing all those tasks. There's a lot of admin that salespeople do that adds no value to them and adds no value to their customer.
Yeah.
Receiving an email request for, hey, Bob, hey, Jane, can you send me over that spec sheet? Hey, can you send me over those drawings? Hey, can you put together, I've got this blueprint for this building job. Can you put together a requisition list for what I need to build this, this track of homes or whatever it is? And so I think that what I want to do, and my goal always, when I especially talk to sales teams, is I want to give them superpowers. I want to give them digital superpowers. And I'm a massive advocate for sales teams, but I'm a massive advocate for doing what they do best, which is going out and hunting new business, going out and building the relationship with existing customers, landing and expanding, finding out new ways that they can serve their customers better with new products, new ranges, helping them understand that I am here to help you do more, be more, and sell more as your
Yeah.
supplier, right? And to give you business intelligence from the industry. And so I think we're rapidly entering a world where digitally augmented sales reps are going to be the standard in the future. And
Mhm.
I look at agentic AI and agentic commerce as EDI 2.0. I don't look at agentic commerce as replacing salespeople. I see it
Mhm.
as taking the heavy lift of the bulk procurement and the bulk communication effort. I see that as taking away pain and giving them superpowers and freeing them up to do the consultative type selling that's required for more complex engagements.
Yeah, I love that. I love that part because I love sales. I love the admin part that you're talking about is very much still a part of our jobs. But to kind of get rid of that and do what you're supposed to do is what every salesperson dreams of. But this conversation just keeps getting better, so I don't want to end it. But respecting our times here, my one last question: if you can end with a success story that you've had over the past 25 years that have kind of brought you here, kind of like the turning, and also any valued information you'd want to leave the future e-commerce leaders, what would that be?
Yeah, look, I think if you can culture all the businesses that I've worked with that have been successful over the long term, not short term fad based success, not even
Mhm.
medium term trend based success, but the businesses that I've worked with that have had staying power for 5, 10, 15, 20, and in many cases, the B2B manufacturers and distributors that I'm working with, they're 50, 75, 80, 100-year-old family-owned, manufacturing or distribution businesses. It's very common that now we have a second and third generation of family taking over running these companies. And the ones that I see that have stood the test of time and continue to stay relevant to their industry and continue to stay relevant as a supplier in their industry, they all have intense curiosity, and they've managed to maintain that over the long term. They also have the uncanny ability to shoot sacred cows in the head, meaning that there is in these businesses, there is no idea of that's always the way we've done it, so that's the way we're always going to do it. They are constantly questioning themselves. Not, is that how we do it? It's, is that the best way to do it? And so I think that if you can marry up intense curiosity, intense humility, intense hunger to grow and learn and take advantage of the latest technology without fear, I think those are the things that stand out to me. And then they have leadership that give air cover to their team members to test and learn and make mistakes. I think, everybody says, oh, we want to fail fast. But if the punishment for failing is you lose your job, then no one is going to even try new things to even have a chance at failing, let alone fail fast. And so I think you have to give reasonable boundaries, but reasonable playground space for your team members to test and trial new things without it coming back to bite them in the ass. And so that's my advice. If we can marry up, this intense, if we have empathy for our customers and the jobs they're trying to do, and we can culture that sense of empathy within our team, then it means by definition, we won't have any sacred cows, because we are willing to do, within reason, anything we can do to help our customers do their jobs better, faster, and easier. So I think if we can keep that mindset, we'll be okay.
Perfect. Jason, this has been such an amazing conversation. I can see the 25 years of experience that you carry with you and every single word you have talked about today. I would love to hear a bit more about it. Maybe just make a series out of, having conversations with you. But just, thank you so much for your time, for giving us quick insight into what your journey has been like. Hopefully some people here who are listening to you today will get, that kind of experience and enthusiasm of working within e-commerce, because we do have some exciting times ahead of us. And any last words before we say our goodbyes today?
No, just look for the eCommerce Edge podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube if you want to hear more from me. We release 3 new podcast episodes every single week. We're up to episode 610. And then connect with me on LinkedIn if you so desire, Jason Greenwood on LinkedIn. And I put out content almost every single day on LinkedIn. So if you like what you heard and you think it was helpful and you want to see more from me, LinkedIn and podcast, probably the 2 best ways to do it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, Jason. It was great talking to you. I hope you had the same fun today with me. And thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Look forward to speaking again soon.
Same here.